Welcome to Everything But the Tip, the podcast that bucks the trend of the mainstream golf content being churned out by the masses. Presented by the co-founders of Smart Golf and Fitness, we're on a mission to guide golfers towards genuine improvement. No swing tips, no shortcuts, we're anti-instant gratification. Join us as we navigate the complexities of the game, offering insights on how to truly excel in golf by embracing the challenges and breaking free from the usual quick fix mentality. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Joe Sharon, and alongside me, we have the very tan Tommy Asuma, as he just got back from a spring break trip in Orlando. How'd that go, by the way?
It was fantastic. Weather was great. I didn't play any G's. I don't think anybody listening to this cast actually cares. But it was fantastic. Thanks for asking.
You did run into Fast Eddie.
I did run into Fast Eddie. We had a nice breakfast. We chatted about some of his current training regimen and some of the things that spilt over from our early days with him. And I'm excited to see him back competing here now that he's healthy. So he's ripping it.
And you did confirm that it's only a matter of time till he's on our one of our episodes?
Oh, I extended a very, very cordial invitation to Fast Eddie. So I trust he will be joining us on a future episode, which will be explosive.
Can't wait. All right, and alongside us, we have once again our Director of Instruction of our future Northbrook facility and PGA professional, Kyle Pekka. Guys, welcome to the show.
I'm very excited for this one.
I understand why, actually. So for this episode, I'd asked Kyle to come up with a topic that he'd like to talk about, and Kyle chose statistics. So my first question is, what exactly do you mean by that? And why did you choose this topic?
I mean, I chose statistics because I really like the story that they tell. It's kind of like looking in the Matrix. It tells a lot more than just the number, on the scorecard at the end of the day. It might tell you why you broke 80 for the first time and what things you can do to reach that next barrier. So I think it's going to be a really good one for golfers of all levels.
Like, even if you're not like playing professionally, not playing competitively at all, like weekend warriors, hackers, duffers, all the trunk slammers, it's, is it relevant for them as well?
I think the stats might look a little bit different for somebody who's trying to play professionally versus somebody who is trying to break 100 for the first time. But I do think that, honestly, the weekend warriors might even get a little bit more out of it than even a tour player. Like, the tour players are looking for fractions of a shot, but you might, through tracking stats, find that there are 3 or 4 like easy shots out there as a 90 golfer that might get you into the 80s for the first time. So yeah, I think there is definitely something for everybody.
All right. Well, I thought I was going to snooze through this one, but you've sparked my interest now. So.
All right. So to piggyback off of that, because obviously I think there is a misunderstanding that you have to be a good player, but can you go into just some detail? Like, what are some aspects to statistics that people do tend to misunderstand, and maybe some myths?
So, I think one of the first ones is what we just talked about, that people think they're maybe not good enough to track their stats and it doesn't matter to them. And like I said, that's really not true. But the first couple that I would kind of go into are, let's talk about handicap. Handicap is not your average score. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Talks more about your scoring potential. Another kind of myth is like the drive for show, putt for dough. There's a lot more that goes into scoring than just driving or putting, for that matter. And then a lot of people still are stuck on the traditional stats of fairways, greens, putts, and much like the score at the end of the day, they don't really tell the whole story, because everything does kind of work in a web with everything else. So there's a lot more to it than just those kind of simple numbers that you can kind of jot down on the card.
All right. So you want to just go through them one by one then? Start with handicap, since you kind of mentioned it's not your average score. Maybe there's some misconceptions out there about what a handicap actually is, and then how it's relevant from a statistical standpoint.
Yeah, so most people think that, all right, I'm a 10 handicap, I should shoot about 10 over par. So let's make par 72, I should shoot 82 every single time. All right, and that's far from the truth. First off, handicap is your scoring potential, so it's your best 8 out of your last 20 scores. And it's not just your best 8 numbers, it's your best 8 differentials. And we're going to get a little technical here. But differential takes into account the course rating and the slope. So an 80 at a U.S. Open setup from 7,500 yards is way different than an 80 at your local muni from 6,100 yards. And I think everybody can kind of understand that those are two completely different 80s, right? So rating is the difficulty of the course for a scratch golfer. Par is 72. It's a really difficult course. Rating might be 74 or 75. So a scratch golfer would be expected to shoot 74, 75, whatever that rating is. And then slope is the difficulty of the course, essentially as you get higher up in handicap. So it's basically based off a bogey golfer. So 113 is kind of the baseline. So if the slope is 113, scratch golfer is going to shoot whatever the rating is. Bogey golfer is going to shoot whatever the rating is plus about 18. On their
Like 90?
So like 90.
Okay.
Assuming rating 72, right?
I can't think of
That's
the
what
last
went up
time
for.
I saw a slope of 113.
Yeah, you're not going to see that very often. Courses tend to get harder the worse you get at golf. There are hazards out there. The only time you would see that would be like basically a bowling alley where it's just wide fairway, no trees, minimal rough, no bunkers. Like, it's just not very realistic, to be perfectly honest.
Do you know off the top of your head kind of like, is there an average slope out there or more a slope that you would expect to see most commonly?
So just from my own experience, I haven't really done the research. Something around 130-ish, 135 is kind of most of the courses that I play. Most of the courses that I play with members or whatever are in that 65, 6,600 yard range. I mean, if I'm playing by myself or with, other PGA pros or whatever, we'll bump it all the way back. But that 6,500 yard, 72-ish rating and 130, 135-ish slope is kind of the wheelhouse for most of the courses that we play around here.
Okay.
I got one question. What's the threshold of like when that slope gets to a certain number where you're like, oh, wow, yeah, that course is tough?
If it starts to get into like the 140s, it starts to get difficult. So, I mean, we're going to go play Victoria National here in a couple of weeks. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I would be very surprised if it wasn't 150. And what that means is that, the scratch golfer, let's make it really easy, rating 72, they're going to shoot 72. That bogey golfer is going to shoot like 24, 25 over, not 18 over, just because they're going to be much more penalized by hazards. So kind of going back to the overview of handicap, it's your scoring potential. So if you are a 10 handicap, that means your best 8 rounds are kind of averaging out to 10 over. So on a good day, you should expect to shoot like 8 to 12 over. Like 12 over would still be a good day for you. And everybody's out here expecting that 10 over is kind of their average, when their average is probably like 13, 14 over, if you really kind of do the math. So
What tees are we playing at, Vic? Because I'm a little nervous because you were right on point. The slope's 152 and the rating's 77.7.
oof.
That's
That's
from
a
7,000
beefy
yards
one.
out.
Yeah,
so
that's,
that's
we're
the
not playing that
championship
far back.
blacks. All right.
I think we're playing pretty far up, 63, 64.
All right.
What is the course rating in slope from 64?
6,400. The course rating at Vic National is 72.8, and the slope is 145. So bring a lot of golf balls is what I've heard.
Bring a
on
lot of
there.
golf balls.
So I think that'll round out the last Dormy course that we haven't played yet. So I'm pretty excited to finish out the circuit.
Yeah,
Ooh, that's
100%.
nice.
And it's not too often that Tommy and I get to compete on the same team. So I need you to talk a little bit more optimistically and positive about your game here coming up. So I do have a question. First of all, there's obviously without a doubt a ton of uncertainty surrounding the complex nature and conversation of a handicap. And I think just to reiterate, guys, remember it is not your average score. It's more indicative of your potential. But I do have to ask, I noticed as the slope went up, 113 to 115, the scratch golfer still expected to shoot scratch, be a scratch golfer, shoot the rating. So, what are your thoughts are when it comes to, playing in a handicapped competitive event, whether it's a member guest or a smart cup, when it comes to, is there any advantages to one of the skill levels? Okay, maybe it is the scratch. Okay, maybe it's the higher handicapper as the slope goes up, because we have to agree there's a little subjectivity, when it comes to determining the slope. What's 4 for 3?
That's usually my score, 4 for 3.
Oh, I was going to say, I think my record's better than that.
There's obviously a little bit of subjectivity, and it kind of depends on the course too. But in theory, the handicap system takes care of it. The course gets harder, bogey golfers get a couple extra pops. But I think it kind of depends on the course. If it's a course where it's tough off the tee and that bogey golfer is just blasting them into people's houses and into lakes, yeah, the scratch golfer might have an advantage if they can keep it in play. But if it's, weird contours around the green, like, you never know. You might have that 18 handicap, bounce one in from the side and be fine. So you never know.
Okay, let's move forward. We've all heard the famous or infamous line, drive for show, putt for dough. By the way, do you guys know who's responsible for that quote?
I do not.
By a
Juan Daly?
guy named, John Daly?
No, Juan Daly.
Oh,
That's what Todd's been drinking at Briggs
Yeah,
Ranch.
yeah.
got it. No, I'm pretty sure he was
Tequila, Jeff.
grip it and sip it,
Okay.
but close enough. No, it was actually by a professional golfer named Bobby Locke, right? I'm pretty sure he won on the PGA Tour 15 times. And
Decent.
please don't look this up. He might have won the British Open 4 times. I don't know. I think that sounds right. Either way, Bobby Locke, for anyone that is interested in history and where that quote came from. But I have to ask, is it valid? Is it true?
I would say as a whole, not necessarily. Now, if you look at like winners on the PGA Tour, it does require some good putting to win, because that's where you are going to, drain a 20-footer and you actually pick up a lot of shots on the field. But all in all, like getting off the tee and getting yourself into good position to attack pins, or not even necessarily attack pins, but make it easier to get the ball on the green relatively close to the hole and put yourself in a position where you're hitting shorter clubs into the green, that by and large is probably a little bit more important. And we can obviously talk a lot more about putting and what matters and all that good stuff. But
I mean, let's talk about it a little bit. Let's just talk about, I think this would be a good example for you to expound upon, but you start to look at the distance in which a tour player is expected. There's just as high of a percentage of them making it as in missing it, right? Do you guys know what that distance is?
it's like 30-ish feet.
No, sorry. So this is
Making it as in missing.
Sorry, so this is the
more like in
distance
the
in
10-foot
which
range,
the
isn't it?
percentage is the same.
Yes, 8 feet. Making a miss. I thought you were. Tommy's big on the big 1-putt and 3-putt thing. That's about 30 feet. But no, 8 feet.
Right,
That's
so-
where they're 50-50.
Right. So go ahead and just expand. I know this is a subject that you're able to dive a little bit deeper into. So go forward.
Yeah, so PGA Tour, everybody kind of knows this, 50-50 from 8 feet. So they're going to make half, they're going to miss half. So once you get outside like 8-10 feet, the percentage that you're going to make putts drops significantly.
Well, especially as an amateur. Now we're talking amateurs, right?
If we talk amateurs, like you're making half your putts as a bogey golfer, you're 50-50 at like 5 feet. So realistically, like, to be perfectly honest, you are not going to make a putt outside 10 feet, right? You shouldn't expect to make it necessarily. No, you should try to. You should definitely try to, but realistically, you're going to 2-putt that.
Expectations should match up with reality of the statistics?
So, yes. So if you're, storming off the green every time you miss a 10 or 12-foot putt, you're going to have a really bad day, because there's not going to go in on a regular basis. Even PGA Tour players are making less than half of them from 10 feet. Now, obviously, you can get hot. There are going to be days where the hole looks like a bucket, and you're going to bury a couple. But you cannot base your golf game on burying 15, 20-footers, because it's so hard to make putts. You can't do that on a regular basis. But like I said, kind of leading into this, yeah, good putting is a good way to get hot for one day, or maybe even a weekend, and win a golf tournament. But it is not going to put you in contention week after week. Like, if you kind of look at Jordan Spieth when he went on his run, he was burying everything. And then, kind of fell off a little bit. And he has not been winning since. So, he's won a little bit since, but not a lot. Not enough. So, yeah, from a putting perspective, like, you should put most of your focus, like, inside 8 feet and outside, like, 20 feet. For a 90 golfer, 20 feet is, like, where you're actually just as likely to 3-putt as you are 1-putt.
Well, that's 30 feet on tour.
30 feet on tour, exactly. So, again, we're talking amateur golf here, like 20 feet. Like, learn how to get that close. Get it close so you don't 3-putt, and you're going to be way better off than trying to, like, bury 15-footers all the time.
Well, I think just going beyond that, once you get outside of that 8-foot range where it's 50-50 anyway, and even, as 10 feet for the amateur golfer, and you start to look at, where am I best suited to allocate my time to improve? Well, don't get me wrong. Like, yes, you should practice putting, and you should become as solid of a putter as you possibly can be, because obviously that does have an impact on your total score. But does it have as big of an impact on your total score potentially as the other areas, right? Because the first question I asked was drive for show, putt for dough. Statistically, does that add up for the amateur golfer?
For the amateur golfer, I would say your biggest thing should be reducing liabilities on the putting green. So if from like inside 6 feet, you can make more than you miss, cool. You're doing a pretty decent job. And then outside 20 feet or outside 10 feet even, like, don't 3-putt. But don't try to base your game on making 20-footers. This is not going to happen. So make putts inside 6 feet if you can. All right, make more than you miss. And then outside 20 feet, get it close. But in reality, like, unless you're 3-putting all the time or missing a bunch of 3-4 footers, you're probably not going to move the needle as much as you will in other parts of your game. All right. If you have 40 putts around, like, yeah, maybe you should work on something a little bit. But
so if I'm hearing you correctly, knowing that about putting, can our listeners interpret that as, I might be better suited at looking at other areas of my game first?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, might be better suited to look at other areas of the game, like see how your stats play out. But yeah, I would agree that the biggest bang for your buck will probably be elsewhere.
Which is, I think it's, we got to highlight and reiterate that, the common theory is when people say, hey, the fastest way to reduce your handicap, reduce your scores, go work on short game. Right? I mean, that's the same as kind of potentially the misnomer of drive for show, putt for dough. Am I wrong with that? Am I interpreting that correctly?
No, I think you're right. And one thing to kind of remember is that we're going to get into this probably more later, but all these stats kind of like steal from each other a little bit. I know I kind of had this plan, but we'll get into it. Is like, if you're missing a lot of greens, then you have to rely on your short game. And if you are chipping it to 10, 15 feet, now you have to rely on your putter. So it's like, did I putt bad and miss a bunch of putts? Or did I put myself in a position where I had to make a bunch of 10, 15 footers? So I guess we can kind of get into the next piece, which is like, all right, what are, the traditional golf stats that maybe are a little bit antiquated, I guess?
Well, I used to do some of the traditional tracking early on when I was trying to get a little bit better. I was looking at fairways and greens. I don't hit a whole lot of fairways, but I find myself near the green, but I always kept some putting statistics, but somebody gave me some advice at one point. I think that kind of leads into what you were alluding to there, is like number of putts doesn't necessarily matter, because if you are missing greens and you have a decent short game, you're getting it close, you're gonna have very, very few putts as long as you can make those 3 and 4 footers. Whereas, if you're hitting a lot of greens but you're not close, you said 20, 30 feet, you're more likely to, just as likely to 3-putt as you are to 1-putt as a bogey golfer. Then you're going to have a very high number of putts, and you'll have this sense that I didn't putt very well. So I started doing putts per green in regulation. So I would keep total putts, but I would realistically keep track of my putts per green in regulation to give me a little bit more, insight as to, did I really have a bad putting day, or was it a bad ball striking day, or was it a combination of both of those things and just a really bad day overall?
Yeah, putts per green in regulation is probably a little bit of a step up from just total putts, but I think there's even more that you could do that's honestly not that difficult to kind of keep track of. So one thing I like to do, this is like almost an intro to strokes gained, which we'll talk about later, but keep track of the distance of your first putt and then how many putts it took you to get in. So if you realize that, all right, I hit 14 greens, so I was always putting from 25, 30 feet, and I 2-putted all of them, like, that's not a bad putting day. Technically, you probably lost strokes, but forget about that for now. But that's not a bad putting day. You're not going to make a lot of those. You 2-putted all of them from 25, 30 feet, fantastic. If you realize that your first putt is like 4 to 6 feet on half of them, and you're still 2-putting every green, well, then we're, in a little bit of trouble, right? So it's not necessarily per green regulation. And again, this is where we get to everything kind of interacting with other parts of the game.
All right, let's get down that path.
Yeah,
you wanted to
you've
talk
been
about
alluding
stroke
to this
gains,
for a
so
while, yeah.
so let's just go right into that. So talk to us a little bit about stroke
I'll
gains.
just say this. We know that the traditional way of keeping stats is outdated. Let's talk about why that is.
Yeah. So it's outdated for a couple different reasons. One, putts, like we just talked about, doesn't tell us if we're hitting good putts or not. You know, if you're 5 feet away and you have 36 putts, 5 feet away on every hole and have 36 putts, that's an awful putting day. If you're 40 feet away on every hole and have 36 putts, that's a great putting day. So total putts doesn't really tell us anything. And then we've got fairways, which if you look at pretty much every level of golf, we're hitting like 50, 60% of fairways from 20 handicaps to tour players. So fairway doesn't really tell us much. I would much rather be a couple feet into the rough, 300 yards off the tee, versus in the middle of the fairway, 200 yards off the tee. And anybody who says otherwise is wrong, for lack of a better term. Basically what they have found through ShotLink data is adding 20 yards to your drive basically negates hitting into the rough. Now that doesn't count hitting into the trees or somebody's backyard, but if you still have a shot at the green, you can be in the rough on the PGA Tour and be in the same, opportunity to score as if you were 20 yards back in the fairway. Now take that to the amateur level where the rough is a lot less penalizing. Most people actually probably like being fluffed up in the rough a little bit. Like 5 yards is probably helping you even being in the rough. So fairways don't mean anything unless you're like mapping it into trees, water, somebody's backyard.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. I did want to mention earlier, as we were just kind of discussing putting and we were discussing it relative to driving, I think just looking at the PGA Tour, it's not a perfect example because obviously there's not a lot of parallels to the amateur golfer, but I do like to highlight that I think people are taken back when you start to look at what area of the game, whether it's driving, approach shots, short game, putting, and what percentage that has on allowing them to gain strokes. Well, we all know this here, but I just want to make sure we let the listeners know, but driving accounts for 28% of strokes gained, which isn't even the number one. Number one is
Approach play.
approach shots. So basically what that means is your shot into the green is the area of the game which you have the most opportunity to gain strokes on the field. At that level, arguably the most critical, important part of the game. And then lastly, yes, short game is 17%, but I think it's worth noting that at that level, putting accounts for 15%, which is actually the lowest percentage out of all those areas of the game. And driving, in that particular case, is almost double. So in some cases it is. Some guys, in certain events, they're 30% of their over 30% of their strokes comes from driving.
I think the parallel and the importance of these statistics and bringing them to light, and the reason we have them displayed in the hallway as our education hallway, is again to make sure that our clients' expectations match up with reality. Kyle mentioned earlier, if you're going out to the golf course as a bogey golfer expecting to hit every 10-footer you have and you're slamming your putter into your foot as you're walking off, then you really haven't paid attention to that. So I think it's important for us to show what the best players in the world do so that we can help manage our games better, as well as how we're reacting to our games and what our expectations are surrounding our games. So
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So yes, we have a hallway here at Smart Golf with a bunch of posters. One of them is titled "Proximity to the Hole." So I'm gonna read it here. But basically, we've chosen certain distances. Okay, so one is 50 to 75. One is 75 to 100, and so on. I'll go through those. But if you start to ask our students, our everyday client, hey, what would you expect the average proximity to the hole on a PGA for the PGA Tour player? And this might be a little different, but for the most part, we're in the ballpark. From 100 to 125 yards, what do you think the average distance to the pin is? Well, you can look at our poster to find the answer, and it's from the fairway, it's 20 feet from 100 to 125. From the rough, it's 32 feet. Now, for the most part, when we first introduced this to our players, they're actually kind of surprised because when you think about all the experiences we have watching golf on TV and you see a guy with a wedge in their hand between 100 and 125 feet, I feel like all day Sunday we're just watching them throw darts.
Well, we're watching the guys at the top of the leaderboard throwing darts, but there was about 100, those 60 players before them that were out there maybe not throwing as many darts. So
Precisely, and that's why that's the average. But going back to what you had said, when it comes back to another opportunity for us to help manage expectations as it relates to reality, I love it when we're working with that 10, 15, 18 handicap or whatever, and he finally is making some strides, hitting some good shots, or even on the golf course, he's from that yardage, from 125, and he hits it to 30 feet as a 12, and he's slamming his club down, all pissed off, when the reality is like, man, one, you're not that good. And that was actually really good. So just to emphasize the importance of statistics, not only to help better understand where you should probably allocate some time to your practice, but it can also help you with a peace of mind and better appreciate your improvement, progress, and current performance level in the moment and at that time.
Yeah, and obviously I'm pretty deep into the strokes gain rabbit hole, but having some of that knowledge just in my head has kind of made it a little bit easier to accept shots that maybe look fine. I know when I have a 5-iron in my hand from 200 yards, pretty much anything on the green is probably gaining me strokes. So I don't need to go flag hunting from those distances. And again, for most amateur players, like, anything on the green is good. There's a clip of Will Zalatoris that came out that was probably a couple years old, but he's like, amateur golfers just get the ball on the green. Like, you don't need to put it to 5 feet. Get on the green and 2-putt, and you're fine.
as long as it's inside 20 feet.
I'd like to hear you go a little bit more in depth too, and kind of putting you on the spot. But you look at amateurs all the time. They're guaranteed to hit a bad tee shot, right? At some point, they're going to end almost every round end up in a situation where they either got to hit the hero shot or they've got to make the smart play. And I know there's some statistics that I think once you learn them, it's like so eye-opening on why the hero shot is just such, for that handicap level, such a poor decision in so many cases. I'm just curious if you can go a little bit deeper on that scenario and offer some insight and information to help them better navigate that scenario when it comes.
Yeah, so actually, let's pretend this is actually off a good drive, but I actually do have like a really good example. All right, we're, let's say in the 18th hole, par 5, and there's water in front of the green. Let's pretend for now that there's opening in the back. So we're fine if we go a little bit long. Let's say as a scratch golfer, all right, we're 235 yards away. Like, probably got to hit like a 5-wood, 3 hybrid, whatever you got in your bag. And you're like, yeah, I'm pretty good at golf. I feel pretty confident about that. But it's probably like 50-50 whether I get it over that water or not. We can kind of run the numbers in our head and be like, okay, if I do clear the water, this is pretty much a guaranteed birdie. Maybe I'll even have a chance at eagle. If I put it in the water, it's pretty much a guaranteed bogey. If I lay up, it's pretty much a guaranteed par. Maybe I can still get up and down for birdie. So the math kind of checks out as like literally 50-50. If you go for it, you might make bogey, you might make birdie, but it's going to all kind of even out at about level par. If I lay up, I'm pretty much going to make par every time with a little bit less volatility. That would be one where like, all right, I'm feeling pretty good today. Got a good lie. Maybe I go for it. All right, but now let's think about it, a little further ahead and a little further back. Let's say we roast our drive. We had 20 yards to it. Now we're 215 away. Now it's like a 4-iron. I feel pretty good about that. Now I'm like 70% sure that I'm going to carry that water. So now the numbers kind of flip in my favor. Yes, I might still put it in the water. I still have to get up and down or make bogey. But now like 70% of the time I'm guaranteed birdie. Laying up, I got par. So maybe with that 20 extra yards, you go for it. But now let's say you don't hit it as good. You hit a little off the heel. And now you got 255. And now it's like, okay, now I got to hit a really good 3-wood to get on there. 30% chance I make it over the water. 70% chance I'm short in the water. That obviously leans towards laying up. And the only time I would maybe like go against those numbers is I'm on the last hole and I need a birdie to get into a playoff. Like, yeah, maybe I hit 3-wood there. If I need to make par to win, like it's stupid to go for it, right? So it's all kind of situation based. And if you kind of understand the probabilities, you just kind of you crunch the numbers in your head and you say, like, if I were to play this hole 10 times, what's my aggregate score? And if the layup is even par and the go for it is 2 under, yeah, maybe you go for it and play with a little bit of risk. If the aggregate over 10 attempts is 2 over par and laying up is even par, then yeah, you probably lay up. But you just got to do a little bit of mental gymnastics, I guess, to figure out what your estimated probabilities would be.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. You've mentioned a few times, just kind of using an example of 20 extra yards off the tee. I just want to highlight that number one, statistically on the tour, if you were to average 20 yards extra on each tee shot, that's the equivalent of 3/4 of a stroke every single round. So on tour, 4 rounds, well, that's 3 strokes. So again, I think that supports the argument how big distance can really be, how big driving can really be when there's that much opportunity to gain strokes just by hitting the ball farther. Now, for you 90 golfers, and put this into perspective, if you're 90, shooting around 90 and you hit the ball 20 yards further, you're gaining about an average of 1.6 strokes per round. So again, put that into perspective. So that's where I want to go back into, some of the myths, distance versus accuracy. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I want to learn how to hit the ball straight before I learned how to hit it far. Is this true? Or, when do errant shots that, maybe you're finding hazards or rough, does poor accuracy ever negate the additional distance?
So you actually kind of hit the nail on the head with the numbers that you just brought up. But like, poor accuracy negates distance when you're losing strokes by either putting it in the water or having to pitch out. But as long as you still have a clear shot at the green, I would take the distance. And as you mentioned, the 20 handicap or 18 handicap or whatever is probably getting more out of those extra couple yards than the PGA Tour player is. And the main reason is, like, PGA Tour player is not scared to hit the 6-iron or 5-iron or 4-iron. But if a 18 handicap can move from hitting a 5-iron to a 7-iron or an 8-iron, that's huge.
Let's get them in the gym then.
So that's one of the main reasons why distance is actually probably more important for amateurs. And we already know that it's crazy important for pros, but the amateurs will get more out of it. And, to kind of talk more to the strokes gained.
Yeah, I want to, if I can. We've kind of dove into it.
Yeah.
Can you give, talking about strokes gained, because that can be a little bit of a complex subject as well. Can you, for our listeners, just try to give it, a layman's interpretation of what strokes gained really is?
Yeah, so strokes gained was developed by Mark Brody, book Every Shot Counts. Dude's a genius, and he basically took all this, ShotLink Tour data and figured out, all right, from this distance, pros are averaging this score. So essentially what strokes gained is how much you improved your position on the hole with each shot. So I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible while doing it in my head. Let's say the 450-yard par 4 that we're playing is playing in 4.2 shots. All right. So this player hits it.
Let me just interject.
Oh, boy.
4.2 shots. What level of player are we talking? Because that matters.
It does. Let's talk tour players for now, and then we'll kind of go back to amateurs, just because I think it's a little bit easier to explain. Sure. And actually, we can even pump the brakes briefly and go to a really simple.
The only reason I said that it matters is because when it comes to strokes gained, and I'll just jump in there a little bit, but it's a measure of how well you perform compared to the average of someone else. And that, yes, in this case, we're talking tour players. But I also think that it's important to note that your strokes gained, if you're a 10 handicap, we can figure that out statistically on the average of other individuals at your current skill level.
Yeah, so they're developing more strokes gained data from Arcos and stuff like that. But a lot of what we have is tour data. So really brief synopsis of strokes gained. Strokes gained is how much you advance the ball in one shot. So let's go back to that 8-foot putt, 50-50. So that, average strokes to hole out is 1.5. If you make that putt, it took you one shot to advance it 1.5 shots. So you actually gained half a shot. If you miss that putt and you tap in the next one, it took you 2 shots to advance that ball 1.5 shots. So you lost half a shot there. And that's basically what we do from tee to green. So drive, or let's say 450 yard hole, 4.2, stroke average. You drive it 290 yards, you got like 160 yards left. All right. So from 160 yards, I think the average is about 3 to hole out in the fairway. So you actually gained 0.2 shots there, because in the one shot that you hit, you advanced it 1.2 shots, because now you only have 3 shots left. So you actually gave yourself a fifth of a stroke advantage, 0.2 stroke advantage on that shot.
So there is obviously a distance you could have hit it to, which was the average score would make it 3.2 strokes from there, therefore not gaining any. And so that could have been, means that you had 180 left in.
Correct.
Got it.
So you could have 180, or, let's say you lay up for some reason because there's a bunker out there. Now you have 200 in. And now you're losing shots. So it's all aggregate and they all play off each other. So the theoretical thing would be like, all right, you hit the next shot, really, really good, and it maybe negates the bad one that you hit off the tee. But all right, so now let's say we hit that shot from 160 yards and we hit it to 8 feet. So now we took it from 3 shots away to 1.5 shots away in one shot. So we picked up half a shot on that. That was a great shot. But now let's say we hit it to 40 feet. All right, so we probably lost a little bit because about 30 feet is where you're going to see 2 shots. So at the end of the day, let's say we end up with a par. We're going to pick up 0.2 shots because just playing at 4.2. So we know that just by making that par. But where did we get those shots? We picked up a little bit on the drive. If we hit it to 8 feet, we picked up quite a bit on our approach shot. And we missed the putt. So we actually lost some shots putting. But it all evened out to 4. And on the other one, we hit our great drive. We hit it to 40 feet. So not a very good approach shot. But we 2-putted. So we actually gained a little bit putting in that scenario, but we ended up with, again, 4. So over the course of the round, all of these like little tiny additions and subtractions add up. And, that's a good way to tell like kind of where you're at. So
It paints the true picture and is exactly why we've just said the traditional way of keeping track of stats is so outdated, because not all hitting fairways are equal. Not all hitting greens are equal, and not all 2 putts and 1 putts, etc., are equal, right? And I think that's the important note, and that there's a limiting understanding of where your game currently stands. And that's where, if you are able to, whether it's using, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but our system here, our scorecard, Arccos, or if you've determined a way to keep track of your strokes gained, it's really, really powerful data when it comes to having a true picture and true accurate reflection on where you are lacking in your performance, which then obviously can help us dictate and determine where we should allocate our time. Where I would say, which we'll talk about here, maybe I'll talk about it right now, is just that I don't think the average golfer is very good, for the most part, at analyzing their round. Right, and that's where I think just going into a bigger subject, where another reason I really like keeping track of stats is because typically, for the most part, when someone gets done with a round of golf, well, they add up their scores and they have a total at the end of it, right? And that's it. And they associate themselves with that score, good or bad. And let's just say if it was a bad day, the reason I don't like not keeping stats is because that score by itself could really be robbing them of looking deeper into the story of some of the positive that actually unfolded from that round, and robbing them from the opportunity to build upon that. And I'll go on a little bit of a tangent here, but I don't think a lot of people realize that the human brain isn't designed for success.
I must have got a special one then.
No, but on a serious note, it really isn't. It's designed for survival, right? So the brain literally prioritizes the retention of negative experiences, right? So I think in the context of golf, the brain's survival-oriented design means that negative experiences such as your score for that day, maybe some poor shots, hitting it bad off the tee, chunking, some setbacks, whatever the challenges were in the round, they just tend to leave a stronger and more long-lasting impression compared to the positive experiences. So this phenomenon is actually often referred to as the negativity bias. And from an evolutionary perspective, the bias just served as a crucial function and helping humans learn from dangerous or threatening situations, therefore increasing, the chances for survival. So like
Like your cooler getting too empty, that's going to threaten your chance of survival on the golf course.
Precisely. But my point is, as we're all aware in this room, a majority of our golfers disproportionately not only focus on avoiding mistakes, rather than capitalizing on successes, they tend to have a long-term memory of the bad and a short-term memory of the good. And I know you're no exception to this, is when a student comes in after a round and we ask them to describe their round. And, it is golf, so we know there's going to be bad at some point. That is not 100%. Majority of the cases, that's what they're starting with. So here, having the power of stats, first of all, we like to point out, and I've said this in other podcasts, that the greatest performers out there have a long-term memory of the good and a short-term memory of the bad. Lesser performers have a long-term memory of the bad and a short-term of the good. So what we try to train all of our golfers and all of our students on after the round is, let's look back and reflect on a round in this manner. Ask yourself, what did I do well? What did I learn? And
what can I do better next time?
what am I going to do about it? Yes. But with stats, I love that because it allows you to quantify and objectively look back and say, hey, I actually did really well here, 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 and here. My score might not have reflected it today, but it's because I fell short here, right? So what did I learn? I'm falling short in this area, even though I'm doing really well in this area. So what am I going to do about it? I really think we should potentially allocate time to this part of my game, because that's probably going to be the fastest route to lowering my index and performing better on the golf course. So again, just wanted to make that point.
I was very surprised to get a brief education on human evolution, but I appreciate that, which is fantastic. Strokes gained explanation, was very, very good, but still can seem pretty intimidating I've gotten into single digits, so I'm pretty excited about that, but I haven't done anything from a strokes gained perspective. So somebody that's just looking to do a little bit more from a stat keeping standpoint, maybe something related to strokes gained. Is there something, an easier way to kind of look at it, like, from an elementary level, and then before you jump into something more advanced like you described?
Yeah, so there are some definitely ways to dip your toe in the water of stats without going full on strokes gain nerd. One big one that you'll hear from, some of the big strategy guys is the Tiger 5. Tiger 5 is basically things that he's looking to avoid on the golf course. And he says, if I have I think 6 or less over the course of a tournament, I'm probably going to put myself in contention. So even he made these mistakes, and it's no double bogeys, no 3-putts, no bogeys on par 5s, no bogeys. I think he said from 150 and in, but everybody hits the ball a little bit differently. So let's say with 9 iron or less, and then no blown easy saves, which I understand is a little bit subjective. But if you've got an easy little bump and run from 15 feet just off the green, that's one that we should maybe be getting up and down more often than not. And you're going to make mistakes, but that's fine. It's minimizing as much as possible. And one extra that I like to add in there is penalty strokes, specifically avoidable ones. If you top a pitching wedge from 120 yards into the water, whatever. That's a bad shot, but you're going to have to hit that shot no matter what. But if you have to carry a 3-wood, 230 over the water and that's your absolute max, maybe don't do that. So that would be an avoidable one, even though they kind of result in the same thing.
All right. Well, even as a single-digit handicapper, sounds fairly impossible to avoid, any of those throughout the course of a round. So, is there any, any other way or any other advice? I like those.
So the first thing I would do is track those, see if there are any that really stand out. I'm bogeying par 5s all the time. Is it because I'm trying to whale on a drive so I can get there in 2?
Yes.
Or is it? Maybe it is. Or am I just, maybe having a little bit of bad luck there, and kind of do a little self-inventory if that's something that you can control with strategy or not. So I'll actually give one super brief example. This is actually how I got from a 5 to scratch in a year. First off,
Shameless plug.
shameless plug there. I got more,
that's
don't worry.
solid,
First off, I realized I was very bad with partial wedges. So I did work on that. But in the meantime, I stopped putting myself in positions where I had to hit partial wedges. So instead of hitting driver on a 350-yard hole and leaving myself with 50 yards, I would lay back and have a full wedge, which if I was actually good with wedges, like I would definitely go to the 50-yard mark. Because that should be easier, but I never practiced it, so I was not good at it. So one, gave me something to practice, and two, gave me something that I should avoid because I was wasting good drives by missing greens from 50 yards.
But wait a
You
minute.
just meowed at him. You remember at Evanston we played in the Pro President? We were playing modified Chapman, and I put you to 60 yards, and then you had a shitty shot, and then you said, "I hate 60 yards." That's what that reminded me
Yeah,
of.
well, it's my knee-jerk reaction to blame everyone else except me. So
That was fun though. We
that's
won.
the
though.
sign of a
we
good
still,
golfer.
We
And
still won.
we did win. Shameless plug.
Full of them tonight.
So yeah, that's one. Just look for any like kind of low-hanging fruit there. If I'm 3-putting all the time, maybe we do actually need to spend some
I
time on the
was
green.
actually going to say, what about the statistics that, hey, closer to the hole, more strokes gained?
So that is true, but that's also with PGA Tour players for the most
Someone
part.
with more elite skill than you from 50 yards.
Well, that's definitely true. But it's also like, what do most amateurs not practice? 50 yards. Why would you go to the range and hit 50-yard shots, right? But now we got TrackMan. It's really easy to hop on there and do a wedge test, do the TrackMan combine, things like that, and work on those partial shots. But, before I started working here, like, I never hit a partial wedge unless I absolutely had to. So I wasn't good at it. Now I'm better at it, so I will get it as close as possible.
No, I would just say, what listeners should take from that is, with stats, you can gain a true picture on where you excel and where you might not excel as much, and then just be realistic about it. It's not to say that you won't at some point allocate time to improve that area so you can take, like Kyle said it, he recognized that there was an area in a game that he just wasn't as strong. So 100% played a role in his strategy on the golf course. Again, another representation of why stats can be so powerful.
Again, it gives you a good thing or a good idea of what you should practice, but it also gives you a good idea of how you should get your way around the golf course. So kind of looking at some other things that we could track. The first thing I would recommend everybody do, which isn't even really a stat, but know your carry yardages from lob wedge all the way to driver. Know if you can carry that bunker or if you can't. Know if your driver's going to run through the fairway. And make sure you have kind of an average and then like kind of what the minimum is, assuming you don't like top or chunk it. And then like what's your absolute max. And just get as much of that dispersion pattern over the green as possible. Don't even worry about the pin. After that, I would keep track of good drives. Don't care about fairways. A good drive is a drive that you hit relatively solid, leaves you an open shot at the green, rough or not. If you're like in a bunker with a high lip and you have to chip out, that's not a good drive. If you have to punch out of the trees, not a good drive. But you might find that you only hit 40% of fairways, but 80% of your drives are good drives because they leave you an open shot and they're not putting you in jeopardy. Putting, like we talked about, it's a good kind of intro to strokes gained. Keep track of how far away you start and then how many putts it takes. If you're 35 feet away, it takes 2 putts, great. You actually gain some strokes.
I love when guys just pound a drive. They're like, yeah, if I really get a hold of this, I might hit it in the creek. And they're like, I can't even be mad at that. Well, yeah, you shitty drive. You hit it in the creek. You striked it. You should have laid back a little bit.
for show, bro.
Now, that being said, this is like more a mental game, make yourself feel good. If you are kind of in between clubs, like most of the time, take the longer one. If you do airmail the green a little bit, you'll probably feel a lot better than if you flush one and come up short. So, kind of use your ego to your advantage in that case.
Okay.
But like I said, putting's a good intro to strokes gained. You can do putting strokes gained pretty easily. But even if you don't want to do that, use the 10% rule. If you're 30 feet away, your next putt should be inside 3 feet. If you're 40 feet away, your next putt should be inside 4 feet. And then if you do happen to 3-putt, you can kind of tell pretty easily, all right, is my lag putting bad? Or am I really bad at short putts? If you hit a 40-footer to 3 feet and you miss the 3-footer, you need to work on your short putts. If you hit a 30-footer to 8 feet, your lag putting is terrible.
Yeah, I always like to tell my clients, I go, you didn't 3-putt because you missed the second one. It's because you hit the first one so shitty. And that's, again, it's not always
Most
like
of the time
that,
it's the
but
case.
most of the time that is the case. And that's why,
Yes.
back to what you said earlier, practicing, that 10 to 20 foot range, there's probably a better use of your time. And that's, practicing the ones inside 10 feet and then the ones, outside of that 10 to 20 range. I like guys practicing a lot of 30 footers to get really, really good at getting that into that 90 percentile make range, which is, 3-4 feet.
I was going to say, if you hit only 30 footers and only 6 footers, you'd probably be able to do some serious damage on the greens. And then the one traditional stat that I do like to keep is greens in regulation. If you're hitting greens, you're going to shoot good scores. So here's another shameless plug. This is one of my favorite stories. I was playing golf in California.
Is it because it's about you?
Yes. No, I was playing golf in California, and I was playing with this couple. Hilarious. The second hole, this 65-year-old woman just hole in one, looked perfect the entire way. It's great. So kind of overshadowed my
What golf course?
San Vicente in where was it? I don't even remember. Either way, in California.
Oh.
What was I gonna say?
She just hit a hole in one. It
got-
overshadowed something.
Overshadowed.
A lot
so
of things.
I had a very, very good round. I think I shot 69 with 2 doubles. Both of those doubles came from tee shots that I hit.
Is this your personal best?
Yeah, it's tied for the personal best. I 3-putted for a 69 at Tobacco Road last year, so that was really neat. But no, I made 2 doubles, and other than that, I hit the ball like an absolute tour player. So this guy that I'm playing with goes at the end of the round, he's like, so this is word for word verbatim. He says, so like, what's the difference between you and a tour player? I'm like, first off, a lot. But secondly, like, if I had to pick one thing, it'd be like short game and then putting. He's like, your short game looked pretty good to me. I'm like, yeah, I hit 15 greens. So, and 2 of the ones that I missed, I had to hit like full wedges into because I blasted into the water off the tee. So there was no short game for you to look at. And honestly, my putting wasn't that good either. I just hit the ball so good that day that I had, I don't know, probably 10 6-foot birdie putts. So
I'm surprised you don't know that exact stat.
I can look. I've got it on Golf Metrics here. Another shameless plug for Golf Metrics. That's Mark Brody's app. But it's like I hit the ball so good that I could have chipped and putted like a 40 handicap and I would have still shot even par. So
So in other words, you would have gained a ton of strokes potentially off the tee, definitely in your approach shot, but you would have lost a lot of strokes once you got on the
my
green.
approach game, I gained 0.2 shots on every single approach shot that I hit. The average, right? So I gained probably a full shot on some of them and, nothing on a couple others. But on average, I gained 0.2 shots, which is absurd. That's the equivalent to that's on tour players too. So that's essentially like a plus 13 handicap, which is bonkers. But I actually putted like a 2 handicap. I missed a 6-footer and I 3-putted from 28 feet, which included a missed 4-footer. So yeah, I kind of messed up some of the basic stuff that I just talked about there. But you can kind of mask that with good ball striking. I don't even remember how we got here, but
You just wanted to talk about yourself, which is cool.
I did.
I appreciate that.
No, there was a reason for it. But
You
I
talking
can't-
about greens and reg.
Exactly.
That
We're
was
talking
the
about
one
greens
traditional
right.
stat you enjoy
So
keeping.
I hit 15 greens in regulation. It did not matter that I putted, again, worse than that score indicated. I hit so many greens. I hit so many like good approach shots that anybody could have putted for me and I would have shot under par. So greens and reg is the one traditional stat that I would keep. And then the other one, like I kind of talked about with the Tiger 5, is avoidable penalties or, errors. Trying to punch out through the trees where, you're taking on a shot that you have no business taking on. And all of a sudden now it's, pinballing around in the trees and you're fighting for double or even triple. That's an avoidable mistake. Take the bogey, go on with your life. One thing to kind of make note of is like double bogeys are for most players like infinitely worse than, but not infinitely, there's an actual number, but let's pretend that you're playing and the stroke average for the guys you're playing with on a par 4 is like 4.5. Making a bogey, you lose half a shot. Making a double bogey, you lose 1.5 shots. So now for each of those double bogeys, you need to make 3 pars to make up for it. Each bogey, you need to make 1 par to make up for it. Assuming everything's like half shot over par because you're a bunch of 9-10 handicaps.
Hey, we play match play.
But in reality, like the guy you're playing against is probably going to make a bogey somewhere. well, I guess with the double bogey, it doesn't really matter with match play. But what I'm saying is you need to make up a lot more for double bogey than just, one extra shot, one extra hole.
Yeah, especially if there's strokes involved.
That's true.
So I think it's safe to say, whether it's strokes gained and you are using an app, which I want to talk about here in a moment, but whether you're keeping track of strokes gained or not, everyone can benefit and everyone should that's serious about getting better of keeping track of some stats. You've given some great examples today, whether it's the Tiger 5 and even if it was the outdated version of fairways hit, green in regulation, up and down, sand saves, and the amount of putts per round. Data's data. It's limiting. It doesn't share the whole picture, but is it safe to say keeping track of that would still be better than nothing?
It's definitely better than nothing. I just encourage you to take it like one half step further and change fairways to good drives, change total putts to, kind of separated lag putts and close putts.
What for the guys that are like, no, I want to take this as far as I'm capable of. What are do you have some favorite systems? I will say real quick, like here at Smart Golf, we do have a scorecard that we've designed that actually educates our members and students, in addition to us educating them as well, on how to fill out a scorecard a very specific way. And what's really cool about that scorecard, and I'm sure we're about to get some requests for it. By the way, we need to get those printed again.
Yeah, we do.
It'll take you to a document that was created by our staff here, or at least utilized by our staff here on Google Drive, which you'll plug in accordingly, and then the algorithms associated with the Google Drive document will automatically give your strokes gained in all of those categories. So it's pretty cool. It requires a little bit of work. But if you're serious and you don't want to use one of the apps, you don't want to use Arccos, which I do want to talk about a little bit, we do have an option and resource here for our players to take a massive step forward to understand what their strokes gained are. But on that note, I've mentioned Arccos. Obviously there's Game Golf. I think you mentioned Metrics, which is Mark Brody. Are there some favorites? Are there any ones that are actually free, or are they all associated with a subscription? Just talk to us about that.
So I use Golf Metrics personally. It's in the very near future getting like a facelift. Right now it's like the most basic of basic apps, but the data is really, really good.
So how does it work? Are you manually putting in the data throughout the round?
So you're manually putting in the data throughout the round. I personally don't mind doing that. I actually just jot it down on a scorecard real quick, or I can even remember it for the most part. I think a lot of golfers can remember every single shot they hit, even if they can't remember some of the other stuff that goes on throughout their day. But I just enter it in after the round. That's fine. Decade Golf, Scott Fawcett, he's got a similar strokes gain thing.
So is Metrics not too dissimilar to what we're offering here? Because we're asking our guys to write down, the necessary information throughout the round, and then they plug it in afterwards.
Yeah, Golf Metrics and whatever our strokes gain spreadsheet is the same.
Okay, now
you have to pay for Golf
subscription.
Metrics.
Okay,
but the nice thing about Golf Metrics is it's going to give you a little bit more like detailed breakdown of where you excel. Like it breaks down putts into inside 6 feet, 6 to 21 feet, and then outside 22 feet. So you can see like, all right, this is where I'm actually losing shots. You don't expect to make every 15 footer, but if you're a scratch golfer, you should maybe make one or two. Basic things like that. Decade Golf. So Scott Fawcett is phenomenal with strategy, shot selection, target selection. And he's got an app which also gives all the strokes gain data. And then Arccos is really good. They're the sensors that go on the clubs. And the nice thing about that is they have all this amateur data too. Golf Metrics is definitely much more geared towards the better player. Decade's definitely geared towards the much better player. But
so technically, if I'm correct, our Google Drive document allows us. We have it for the 80s shooter and the 90s shooter as well. So
I haven't even looked at that in a while. Not gonna lie, because I've been using Golf Metrics. But
all right, well, we're gonna talk about that later.
Dude, you gotta go with the godfather of strokes gained. But Arccos is great because it's gonna show you compared to people of your skill level, or if you're a 13 handicap that wants to get to a 10, you can compare yourself to 10 and see where they are typically gaining on you and where maybe you're ahead of the curve. But those are really good places to kind of get started if you are looking at strokes gained.
Beautiful.
Well, this episode, hopefully people didn't turn it off right away when we told them we were going to talk about statistics, because I learned a ton. So a ton of good information. I think there was a lot of applicable points that, golfers of all abilities and desire abilities can draw from there. So just give me a quick elevator pitch. I mean, we talked about a ton of stuff, but give me a quick elevator pitch, listeners, an elevator pitch on why you should keep stats.
So kind of as Joe mentioned earlier, the number on the scorecard at the end of the day only tells part of the story. Stats, and even at the bare minimum, base level, are going to paint a little bit better picture of what you're doing well, what you need to work on, and then kind of give you some guidance on what you can do about it. So I think that everybody, regardless of skill level, should do some sort of stat tracking.
Beautiful. Can I give a tip?
Do it.
Absolutely.
I just want to say that working on your golf swing is definitely part of the recipe to get better at golf, but it isn't the only piece. And hopefully we proved that in what we discussed tonight, diving deep into the statistical part of golf and how just honestly making better decisions and better understanding your current performance level can have a massive impact on helping you make better decisions and play better golf overall. And the last part I would say is, from a peace of mind perspective and just enjoying the game, when you're out there and you are from that 100 to 125 distance, which I talked about earlier, and you hit the green and you're a 10, no one should ever see you slamming the club the fact that you're 30 or 40 feet away when the tour average is 20 to 32 feet.
Hey, great tip.
I don't even know if I gave a tip there, but take it for what it is.
I mean, I can
This
give
is
you my
everything but the tip anyway, but go ahead and give one.
No, my one tip is just honestly don't be lazy and go the extra step. Don't make the excuses. Like, track something, literally anything.
More than your score.
More than your score. Even if you are doing the base level, which we already kind of said is not the old traditional stats, are not necessarily the way to go, but like do literally anything and it will make sure that you are allocating time appropriately in your practice.
Love that.
Beautiful.
Kip us to that.
Kipis.
A big thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Everything But the Tip podcast. Stay connected with us on all social media platforms by following @SmartGolfFitness. For additional episodes, updates, and exclusive content, check out our website at smartgolffitness.com. Don't forget to show some love, like, share, and subscribe to ensure you never miss out on the latest insights and engaging discussions. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep swinging and stay fit.